everyone. We will be getting started in a sec. I just want to check you can hear me okay and the sound's okay. I'm just going to readjust the picture so slightly for you as well. Can everyone hear me okay? Good morning, Jay. Okay, good morning everybody. Hello. Sorry, we're just getting everything set up. I think I'm ready. Let's have a quick look and I might just... Oh, I can see you, Graham. I can see you in the corner of the camera. Look at that. Yeah, I can still see you. You're still hiding. 2 seconds. Let me just sort that.
You can tell this is not the BBC.
This is definitely not the BBC. Okay, sorry guys, we're literally just doing the last couple of checks, making sure we're all nice and clear as we can be. And hopefully that should give you a nice picture. What is it we say, Graham? Close enough is good enough?
Near enough is good enough.
Okay, that's okay then. Right. Let me get started. Where am I? I'm on that one. Hello, good morning. Hello. You can see I've actually got headphones on today so I can hear what's going on. So I'm just waiting for that to catch up. Apologies just for a couple of minutes late start. We're just getting our tech sorted. It is always a challenge doing technology in a 250-year-old prison. Some of the walls are about 3 foot thick, so it can be quite challenging with the Wi-Fi and stuff like that. So getting us set up so we're able to stream smoothly, getting the camera set up so they're feeding smoothly, getting the sound set up. As you can see, we've kind of improved the sound hopefully a little bit, so you should hear me nice and clear. And you'll be able to hear Officer Goodwin nice and clear, who's just waiting in the wings, the literal wings, full of jokes this morning. So we're good to go. You can see I've got the desk, you can see I've got my Mac. So I'm going to feed through the comments all morning. So if you've got comments, you ping them through, got questions as we go. Officer Goodwin has said to me, if you want to ask questions as we go through the live this morning, I will pick them up, I'll shout them in. He's going into a cell, literally, it's a couple of meters away from me, and he'll be going into that cell there, and we'll get him started in a second. We are going to do another one of these next week on Wednesday as well. We're actually going to do one downstairs because right now we're on the 2s. We're going to do one on the 1s next week, which will cover the downstairs of A wing. It's going to cover segregation, the strip cell, constant watch, MDT. And a couple of other places that Officer Goodwin will take you through. So do join that for next week. I will just post the link for that now. And on top of that, I'm also going to post... Actually, I'll just post that link for you in the comments. So I can see Officer Goodwin is over there. He's urging to go. He's shaking. He's telling me to hurry up and stop chatting. So I'll pin that comment for next week. Also, just because I need to do the plugs, you can see potentially behind me, if I just move to the side, just over 2 meters away is our marketing director, Harriet. So she's over there giving me little pokes about what I need to plug. We do a live on a Saturday evening with myself, with Lauren and Stacey, basically looking around the jail, a bit more of a paranormal one, but a really good live to watch. And we like to think it's a bit more of a show as opposed to as to a tour. But I think that's probably me. I think I've talked enough, haven't I, Harriet? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, perfect. Graham, you're at about 225 people. So what I'm going to do, ladies and gents, is I'm going to fire up Graham. Graham, just give me a level on that mic for me.
1, 2, testing. Shall I sing a song for you?
Perfect. Okay, right. So your mic is sounding nice and clear. People should be able to hear you. I'm sure if they can't, they will tell me. I'm very tech capable, I promise. No, so we'll see how this.
See me shaking my head,
we'll see how this goes. Let me just kill my speakers there. Okay, cool. Right, Mr. Goodwin, Officer Goodwin. I have put it on cell 5. The show is all yours. I will be quiet.
Thanks very much. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 2. Today we're just going to talk a little bit about a cell, a typical cell that you would have found in the old Victorian building. So I'm going to go through the little bits and pieces of it. They're not as simple as just a door with people behind it. There's a lot more things going on than that. So we'll make a start. Originally, I think I said last week, this is a Victorian prison. So the door that you see there is not the original door. It's actually been replaced at about just after the year 2000. And they're replaced for a number of reasons. One of them is that if you get cell barricades under the old doors, they were very, very difficult to get into. So what they did is they brought out the steel kind of door, and it is possible now to undo a metal bolt that sits just there inside the wall, and the door will now swing open. So it means accessing the cell much, much easier in the case of cell barricades, or even if the prisoners barricaded the cell and maybe attempted to take their own life, or there may be a cell fire in there, and we need to access this cell very, very quickly. To help with that situation, you'll notice in the center of the door there's a little yellow dot. That yellow dot there is called a fire inundation point. So in the event of fires, and I remember a time before these, we would have to get to these doors, get these doors open and get in there and actually fight the fire and obviously hopefully get the prisoners out and deal with any medical needs that are there at the time. Though these days we've got a special tool to take that out. We can take that out and we can actually get the main fire hose reels, put them in, lock them in, and it sprays a high jet of spray water into the cell, thereby putting that cell fire out as quickly as possible. Now you have to bear in mind, if we don't access that cell fire quickly, you're going to have a situation where smoke can be rising. It can rise up through the vents in the cells, it can rise up out under the doors, up into the landings. You can imagine the huge problems that you can have, particularly on nights. If you're on nights in a prison like this, there'll only be 2 staff on this wing to over 300 prisoners. If you've got smoke getting in those cells, you're just going to increase the whole issue and problems that you're going to have to deal with. And believe me, I've been in one in my career, and it's a pretty hairy, scary place to be. So yeah, that's the cell inundation point there. Although inside each cell these days, there'll also be a smoke detector in there, so it is much, much safer behind these doors than it used to be. You have to bear in mind, when prisoners are behind these doors, they don't have any keys. So if something goes wrong, you can see why we need to build the safety as best as we can. Just stepping back a little bit into history, in the Victorian times, you may be able to see just there that the brickwork is actually different. In other words, somebody's put bricks in there. It's the same on all cells, because in the Victorian times, that used to be a hole that went back to a slot, like an arrow slot in a castle. And at night time, candles would be placed in there and prisoners would be allowed to read, bearing in mind in the Victorian times, the only book they got would have been the Holy Bible. That would have been. And at a certain time at night, the candle would be taken out and the wooden blocker would be placed in there just to seal the whole thing off. So that's from the outside. When I first come to this prison, this system didn't exist. This is what they call an emergency cell bell system. And the reality of that, there's a button on the inside, which I'll demonstrate in a minute, and that's so that if prisoners have emergencies inside their cells, they can actually press the bell. It sets off some of what they call the door alarms and the system in the wing, so we know where to come to attend to that situation. They are designed for emergency onlys. I would be telling you a lie if I didn't say that these things were overused and used inappropriately. But it's one of those things that we manage and live with. But cell bell. There's also a light switch there. There are 2 light switches. The prisoner has access to a main light in the cell, but if they turn that off during the night, which they nearly always do, if we need to be checking prisoners during the night for things like self-harm watches, suicide watches and security watches, we have an outside light there which is much dimmer than the one inside. So when we switch it on, we can see inside the cell, but it doesn't actually sort of be that bright that it's going to wake people up. So basically that's there. That didn't exist when I come here. They used to have the old, for the older generation that remember things like the old Morris Miners with the old arms that used to flop out the side of the car. That was the system here, what they call a flag drop. They'd press a big piece of metal in the inside and it would push the thing out so staff knew where the prisoner was asking for attention. But so this has all been around since about probably the mid-90s. Perhaps, yeah, about the mid-90s, stuff like that. So, yeah, that's basically a little fuse box up there. That fuse box is quite low rated because prisoners now have access to power in their cells where they can use their CD players, TVs, their kettles. Remember, kettles operate on at least 2 kilowatts. So we need to low rate that so that in the case of overburdening the power system, we can individually switch it. And in emergencies too. If we find, my little alarm clock, it's time to get up, going off.
I was going to say, is that the clock that tells
I'm retired, mate.
You're finished work for the day?
The great thing for being tired is I get up when I want to. Yeah, the fuse box up there, like I said, it's low rated because if we have to go into cells for emergencies, we'll need to be able to cut the power off before we actually go into the cell. So they're all individually rated as well. Right, let's step inside the cell and have a little bit of look as they are today and how they might have been. I'll explain all that when we get in there. So let's make our way in, guys.
You want me to change the camera?
Change the camera. Keep me in shot.
Just that mic's popping just a little bit, Graham.
Right. Have you got me in there?
I have. I can see you on 4 different cameras.
Okay.
The mic is just popping a little bit, so I don't know if you want to just hold it nice and steady, make sure it's clipped in properly in the bottom. It's fine. It's just make sure it's clipped in. It's just giving us a few pops.
Can you hear me, Mother?
Yeah, yeah, I've got you loud and clear. So I can see you and I will jump around with you on the cameras. Ladies and gents, this is not a BBC production, is it, Mr. Goodwin?
No. It was never like this when I was in Holby City, I can tell you that.
So what we're going to be doing is, I am outside the cell, obviously I'm in the central hub in control of the cameras. I'm going to try and flip between the cameras as Officer Goodwin is speaking, so he's going to slow down a little bit for me so I can keep up, and he's going to obviously take you through a prison cell. Now this is, I'm just going to say, Graham, this is something really, I think, quite special, because when you do the tours, of which you've done thousands and thousands of tours now, you've been doing this for 5 years, this is something you don't normally do, is it? You don't go into prison cells like this and show everybody every single thing. You explain it from the outside and they can obviously go and have a look, but this is something we've not really done before. No, the reality is when I'm taking a group of 30 or 40 people around, there just isn't the facility to get everyone into a cell. I do explain it from the outside and people wander in, and self-guiders can wander in and look at these cells, but I'm just going to fill in a lot of those details that people wouldn't be aware of in cells. Hold on, sorry, just 2 seconds, Officer Goodwin. Someone has just tagged Holby City, so if you're not aware, Shrewsbury Prison is actually the backdrop for a number of different productions, and if you ever see a prison on Holby City City or Casualty, so what is Holby Prison, or actually if you see a prison in Coronation Street, which would be Weatherfield Prison, those are both Shrewsbury. So Holby City film here, Casualty film here, and Coronation Street film here. So the riot that David Platt had in the prison, that was literally filmed right behind where I'm stood right now. When Rick was in prison in Holby City a couple of years ago, that was filmed downstairs on the one. So this, everything that happened in the cells was all filmed here. And actually, Graham you were an advisor on that, weren't you, for Holby City?
I was. I had, I mean, one of the things about being an advisor, you tell them how it really happens in prisons, and then, no offence, they go along and do whatever they want because it's a dramatic show, and you can't literally, otherwise you'd end up with a documentary, wouldn't you?
Right, just make sure that mug's nicely plugged in. Just unplug it for me a second, and plug it back in, will you? Yeah, just unplug the mic and plug it back in. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, just trying to get rid of that popping as best we can. Say something?
Picking me up?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that sounds a lot better.
Okay, I'll hold it a little bit.
Sorry, I will be quiet. It's all yours, Officer Goodwin.
Okay, yeah. So inside this cell now, they're a standard size. Be honest with you, when the Victorians built these prisons over 30 or 40 years, they virtually used one set standard. You have to appreciate this cell that we're looking at now would have only held one prisoner. There would have been one prisoner. They believed in sort of single cell accommodation in the Victorian times, and that was so they could keep the prisoners in isolation and basically keep them on a silent regime as well. So in this cell, there would have only been something like, if you were lucky, a very basic wooden board bed. There would have been a bucket in the corner to slop out into. That's your toilet. And they may have had some access to some water during the day. Hot drinks and things like that would have probably been relatively unheard of in those days. So a single cell. When I came to this prison in 1988, transferred from another prison, there were actually 3 prisoners in this cell. So we were overcrowded through the late 80s into the early 90s, and the reality is there were 3 prisoners. Now you have to imagine in those days there were no toilets in these cells, there was no power in these cells, so you had 3 prisoners. Probably where you see these tables just here, you're going to see there would probably be a 3rd bed laid across the floor. Now in this room they would have had 3 separate toilet pots, 3 jugs to collect water, 3 bowls to get themselves a strip wash every day, because when I came to this prison, prisoners only got 1 shower per week. 3 men in here, and there would have been much less activities going on. When I came here, there was no such thing as association, where prisoners were allowed to come out and associate with each other and spend more time out of their cells. So particularly on a very, very hot day, you can imagine here. Slopping out might be an expression you've heard of. The reality is with slopping out, it's not a pleasant experience, not for them. Imagine sitting in these cells, as it used to be, from 5 o'clock at night till about 7:30 the next morning, and having to slop out your toilet waste out in the old recesses out on the landings. So the smells were not particularly pleasant, as you can imagine. Nearly 350 odd people coming out of these cells, all making their way to the recess to clean it and get a jug of water and or get a bowl of warm water to have themselves a shave and a wash before they went to labour or to education.
Officer G.
So that's the way it was, and it stayed that way until 1993, 94. We decided to sort of get dragged into the 20th century kicking and screaming, the 21st century kicking and screaming. This is when we placed toilets in cells. And when we did that, we obviously had to come back down to 2 prisoners in a cell. And then we also put power points in the cell. This is at the time when prisoners had access then to TVs, which they rent. I believe today they still pay 50p per week to have access to the TV. There's also a little kettle that they can have, which they can use to boil water. So now they can access hot drinks behind their cell door, something that they couldn't do before.
Officer Goodwin.
There's no big deal with something like that. Unfortunately, you'll end up with a situation, boiling water obviously can make it an easy, convenient weapon to be used.
Graham.
Yes?
Sorry, I just realised, I started chatting into my mic and then realised you can't actually hear me because you haven't got an earpiece in. Somebody's just asked how smelly it was when prisoners only got to have a shower once a week and there were 350, 400 prisoners and they were all slopping out in the buckets.
Well, it's one of those things. First of all, I've never spent any time in a cell overnight with a prisoner. If you can imagine, when there were 3 of you, not everybody is hygienic or as keen to be as hygienic as perhaps others could be. And that can be a source of tension, as you can well imagine. There are some prisoners that come to prison, most of them I imagine, that want to be clean and tidy and hygienic and have their showers or their baths and keep as clean as possible. And there are others that are not so bothered. And perhaps the idea of having a bath once a week was suitable to them. Some of them may not go and access the change of clothes that they can do once a week, and they may be sitting in the same pair of socks for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. So you can imagine that can cause a tension behind a cell door if there are people that are not inclined to be as hygienic as others. So yeah, not pleasant, but you can imagine if you're in a prison and you're pooing and peeing into your plastic potties and you're living with that all night, you're going to be bringing that out, as I said before, so not pleasant. But I've got to be honest, for 99% it was what it was. It was what it was. It was just an accepted standard of the day, of course. I've never had a problem with toilets being placed in cells. I've always been a big believer basic hygiene really should be not an issue at all. It's good for them, and it's good for us as well as staff, so I don't have any problem with that. I just want to get back to the boiling water about the weapon again, if I may, because it's one of those casual things we don't think about a lot, but it's such a convenient weapon for prisoners to use, either on each other or on members of staff. And some have been known to get sugar and mix sugar up with it until it's real sticky and gluey. One of the nicknames they use for doing something like that in prisons has been napalmed. For anybody that may be old enough to remember the napalm-style bombs that they used in the Vietnam War, it sticks like glue to your skin and it's going to give you life-changing injuries. So you can see that there is an issue with those kind of things. Like I said, they can have CDs, they can have TVs in their cells. In some of the more modern prisons, if you imagine now places like HMP Berwyn up in Wrexham, you've got Alt Course down in the Midlands, not Alt Course, sorry, Oakwood down in the Midlands. In their cells, they will have showers in their cells. They will also have flat screen TVs. If you're looking in our TV, that's an old-fashioned style TV. It would have been a flat screen TV that was sitting in the cells these days. I believe in the modern prisons like Berwyn, they may have some version of like a laptop. It's an internal system where they can do applications basically through that system and find out information on that system without having to need to go to staff to ask them for that information. And there are also telephones in cells these days. Nearly all modern prisons that have been built will be built with the telephones in the cells. And some of the older prisons, there's a program going on in the country now to introduce telephones in every single cells. Telephones generally were introduced probably in the early 90s, not long after I came to this prison, but they were based out on the landing. And prisoners had to apply and go onto the telephones. Now, before anybody gets the idea that they can just pick up these phones and call anybody they like, it's not like that. They have to supply the numbers they want to talk to. Those numbers are checked out, and the system and the computerized system can put checks and balances on the times that the phone operates and the amount of times and the amount of length of time that a prisoner may spend on the phone. So they're all recorded. Every single phone call is recorded within the prison, even the ones that staff make from their offices up on the landing. So that's that there. Typical bed layout here. You'll see that the double bunk bed, that was a typical layout in prisons. That's the actual furniture that you're looking at there. It hasn't been changed. We did move on to wooden-based beds, and you'll see in some cells, if you come on a tour, that there's the wooden-based beds. They're just more modern, I suppose. But and this is the bed. That's their original blankets. You're looking at the original blankets there. These are the original sheets. This is what they use. And that's the mattress. And it's got a vinyl covered on it, just like these pillows here, which you may be able to see.
Hold on, Mr. G, I'm just changing the camera for you. Which camera do you want? Point to the camera you want.
The reality with these old vinyl things, for those of us that remember the old vinyl seats in cars where you used to sweat when you were driving along, this is basically what you've got here. They are fire retardant, of course. But these covers didn't exist when I first came here. Sometimes they were just a foam mattress lying on the bed. So basically, that's your cell furniture. This is relatively a tidy cell. Some prisoners are extremely clean and tidy in their cells. They're going to be living in these conditions for a long, long time, some of these prisoners, and they're clean and tidy, and others are not so. others are not. So it is what it is. And this cell is relatively empty. By modern standards, prisoners they're allowed to have books. They have all their personal items, relatively personal items. They're going to have all their clothes that they're going to be wearing. You'll notice up there under the window, they fashion little lines, because when they go to the showers, and they have showers, there's no special place for them to dry these towels out to be used the next day. So sometimes they'll hang them up in front of an open window to get themselves things. And sometimes they'll swill and wash their own underpants and socks on a relatively regular basis. Although prisoners do get to change their clothes once a week on an exchange system, stuff like that.
Officer Goodwin?
Yes, sir.
I've just had somebody, actually they've posted a few comments, but somebody's just said that they think it's too easy now in prison cells. They shouldn't have TVs. It's too much like a hotel. And they shouldn't be able to have those devices or anything along those lines. Can you just touch on, I guess, I know the answer because I've spent a lot of time with you, but how for an officer that works, why the benefit of TVs is there, and how that makes a difference to how the prison runs as well, for you and for the prisoners?
I can understand the question. I can understand, and lots of people, even on tours, that come round and say, well, it's too easy. The reality is I don't make a real judgment on that, because I work on the assumption that the government make these conditions in prisons because they think it's a fair and reasonable thing to do in the society we live at today. And there are loads and loads of personal views about whether they should have nothing, whether they should earn everything that they get when they first come to prison, and whether we should be given to them in the first place. TVs, and I've got to be honest about this, when they first introduced TVs, I was one of those, whoa, what they having TVs for? They're given TVs. And over the years, we got used to it. And to be honest with you, they do end up being pacifiers. When you're going to be locking prisoners up, particularly today when you think of COVID-19, where prisoners are probably locked up in their cells for most of the day, it's going to be a distraction. It's going to be a distraction for many to watch the TV. They don't get unlimited channels. They're not watching Netflix and Now TV and all that stuff. The channels that they watch are relatively limited. So from a personal point of view, I've never really had an issue with a TV in the cell. Now, just to justify that, there are 3 levels that prisoners can be on when they're in prison. So it's not a case of give it to everybody and never take it away. What you've got is a basic, standard and enhanced regime that runs in prisons. All prisoners are given the benefit of being on standard when they first come to prison, and as long as they maintain that level of behaviour and compliance, they can then move up to what they call the enhanced. Enhanced, they're entitled to more privileges, they're entitled to more visits, and generally it's those incentives for prisoners that are behaving within the rules and regulations and ticking along. And then we've got the basics. So if people are intent on breaking the rules and regulations, or just causing huge amount of problems for us, they can be reduced down to a basic level where they will lose the TV. Prisoners on basic level get the minimum of everything: the minimum pay, the minimum entitled to their visits, the minimum entitled to go to the gym, and they will lose access to their TVs for a period of time until they go along. We have what they call the warning system, the 3 strikes and out, if you'd like to call it that. So there are some checks and balances in that as well. I don't know whether that's covered the answer there, Joel, but
yeah, no, very comprehensively, and I think I've been on hundreds of tours myself and run a few, and I know there's always the question of the carrot and the stick, isn't there? In the sense of, if they have a TV, then obviously there is something that you can always take away from a prisoner if they misbehave, and therefore you've got the ability to utilise, luxuries, if you will, although we take them as everyday givens, things like TVs, haven't you, to be able to ensure prisoners follow the rules, because prison has a list of rules. So
can I just interrupt there? I just think, to put it in its place, I know sometimes you get the impression, and not everybody, but I hear people talk a lot and all that, and we get the impression that every single person that comes to prison is somehow truly rotten, and they're just intent on causing problems and giving us grief and wanting to assault everybody, and that's not true. That's not true. Yes, they've come to prison, and the courts and the judges have decided that prison's the most appropriate place for them to be for whatever the crime that's been committed. But there are many prisoners, in my experience, and I've been an officer for 30 years, come to prison, they just want to do their time and go home. They don't want any grief. They just want to get the best job they can. They just want to tick along, do their sentence without any particular big concerns. Now you're going to have prisoners, there are going to be a small element of prisoners that just come in and they really, really struggle. They struggle to conform to any rules and regulations. You've got your bullies and your intimidators. You've got your drug dealers. You've also got prisoners that can't cope, that come to prison that are struggling with mental health issues. You've got them coming that have got, they might have ADHD, Asperger's, they might have learning behaviour difficulties. So you can see there's a whole spectrum of prisoners that come through these doors. White collar crimes, highly intelligent prisoners, some that had poor education. So I do read comments where we sort of got to that place where we just lump everybody together. And the reality is, if that was true, we'd never run these prisons. We just wouldn't run the prisons. They just couldn't run it if they were all of that ilk. But
yeah, and in fairness, on the comments, there are some ex-prisoners on the comments right now saying about how actually prison is a very difficult time. And yes, they may get a TV, but they're not able to see their loved ones. They're not able to spend time with their children and see them grow up and so on and so forth. So there's, as you're saying, it's a difficult time.
That's a very interesting point, and absolutely a right point. For the person that said that, that's true. Remember, the theory behind locking people up in prisons is not to sort of give them a hard time. It's to take them away from the freedom that they had to be with their families, to associate out in society as free members of society. And for some prisoners, that's an extremely difficult place for them to be. And remember, to be honest, some prisoners come in once and you never see them again. And that's the sole lesson they go. And I've had them come on visits with me and said, I did it once, boss, never going to do that again. That was once was enough for me. Others come in 2 or 3 times, and then sometimes they decide that there's a better way to live their lives. And there are other prisoners that keep coming in continuously for all kinds of complicated reasons out there why they keep coming back to prison. And they'll keep coming back for 10, 15 or 20 years sometimes, and it's only in their 40s and 50s where some of them actually slow down from what they're doing and start to come into prisons less and less. So the person that made that comment is quite right. And that's exactly why prisons are about, taking the freedom off people and taking them their access and all that. And you have to remember, when people are in prison, for their families, that may cause a huge amount of stress. There are partners and wives and husbands and other partners out there having to manage to look after the family household, possibly with a reduced income, and having to deal with all those issues. So there are those issues that do come up within prison. So it is a good point that's been made, yeah.
Officer Goodwin, there's some great questions coming in, some brilliant questions which we'll pick up afterwards. Somebody just asked about solitary confinement. We're actually going to do SEG next week downstairs in the one, so underneath where we are now, we'll do segregation. We'll cover all of that next week, so I think I'll leave that one for next week. There's some really good questions coming through, which Harriet, I know behind me, is scribbling them down really quickly, so she can pass them over in a second and we can ask Officer Goodwin. So I know she's on that, I can see it. Officer G, behind you, I can see these vents. Can you talk to us very quickly about the safety and the heating, and I guess kind of the health and safety piece in the prison, because obviously there is an aspect of keeping prisoners safe behind those closed doors. Yeah. So things like fires, and also anybody that's visitors in the depths of winter. It's fine now, I'm stood here in a t-shirt, you're in a short sleeve shirt, it's lovely and cool, it's a nice air conditioned sort of 18, 19 degrees in the jail. In the winter, it is freezing. What do they do in terms of heating? When the Victorians built this part, they thought about this, and they actually, when you think about it, if you take a look down into the corner of the cell just there underneath the window in the one corner, you'll be able to see a little place. That's actually a vent. And this is where hot air that used to be coming from underground, however they used to heat it in those days, and that warm air would rise up into the cell, and it would keep rising. And if you take a look above the door just up there, you'll see another vent where the air used to be able to escape from. And this air would travel up through underneath the wings, through the 1s, the 2s, the 3s and the 4s, and out to the chimney stacks at the top. And it was perfectly efficient. I must be honest, this prison was a very warm prison in the winter. I used to be able to walk around these landings in the coldest of days, and just as I am now in shirt sleeve order. And the reality is there's no heating out on the landing out there. So these cells, they would heat up and they would let this air out. So relatively, this wasn't a cold prison. I can't speak for other prisons, of course. And it's particularly efficient. There are no pipes running through here, so there's nothing for that few elements of prisons that might decide to be destructive, to smash pipes, to break pipes if there's water in them, or hot steam or air, stuff like that. And we used that up until the day we closed.
One of the dangers with these, sometimes the vents down there used to get broken. And prisoners, thinking that they used to let cold air in there, used to shove paper and towels down there to try to block the air coming up. And what they were doing was blocking warm air rising. And on one or two occasions in this prison, we've had cell fires that have emanated from down there. Because what they would do then, obviously as the heat rises, it builds and it builds and it builds because it's getting trapped. And before you know it, you'd have a fire down the shaft. And obviously you get the smoke coming up into the cell. Obviously, we're lucky. We've got a fire brigade that's only literally less than a quarter of a mile away from us, so the fire brigade come in and end up dealing with that situation. So yeah,
can I just pick
happened
up
a couple
there?
of times, but not too often.
Officer Goodwin, just before you continue, can I just pick up there? When we took over this jail, and Graham and I were here together doing it, another couple of officers as well, when we took over, we had to systematically go through every single cell and search every single cell to make sure there was nothing left in there that was unsafe or dangerous for the public. And we did find, behind some of the sinks, we found like broken razor blades and stuff like that, and it was actually, and I don't know whether I should say this or not, I'm going to get in trouble for this, I can tell, but it was 18 months after we opened, and one of our CSAs, Lauren, who's now a site manager, she was doing the cleaning and the vacuuming in some of the cells, and she vacuumed in behind one of the vents to get all the dust out, and out came a sock with 3 big rocks in it, which is now actually in our museum. So even 18 months after we opened, which was for nearly 3.5 years since the prison closed, we were still finding effectively weapons in the vents, which just goes to show how, I guess, well they hide these things, aren't they? Because obviously you have to do your searches on dailies and weekly basis, and obviously we'd been in and out of cells, lots of people have been in cells, but we still found something further down the line. So it was always quite interesting, I guess, to me, as somebody that's not been in prison before, at the kind of things that you find and how inventive prisons are in terms of hiding things in what is a very small space with not a lot of hiding places.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you must remember, if you're looking at this cell now, which is a relatively, I'd say, uncluttered cell, there's nothing on the tables, personal items, they have their books and all their bits and pieces, their personal letters. Searching a cell is not a simple process, and you can imagine having to come in and search the cell. You've got to search under the cupboards, through everything. You've got to go through every single item. You will be going through the sheets. You'll be looking to see if the mattresses have been split and they're trying to hide stuff in the mattresses. You'll be trying to check that these are still bolted to the floor, that this isn't loose, that they put things inside pipes, underneath the cupboards, underneath the floor, up against the back wall, inside books, using aerosol cans, changing them so that it might be hiding stuff in the bottom of it, and then trying to replace bits and pieces to make it look like it's still an aerosol can. Inside tea bag. Believe me, for every way that we find that a prisoner has got something hidden, they'll find another way to hide it. That's always been that way. There's no difference there.
Officer Goodwin, so when you're sort of saying in books, are we thinking Shawshank Redemption style here, where people would actually carve out pages and hide stuff inside? Would you have
Yeah, it has happened. It's relatively unsophisticated and probably not something that would be a common thing, because it's relatively easy to flick through a book and find these things. So, there are much more sophisticated ways for prisoners to hide things, believe me. It's been known that sometimes they might try to place razor blades up underneath the rim of the toilet, and that's more to see, because if an officer goes in and he's going to have to search inside the toilet, if they put their hands in to see if there's anything tucked underneath, because they're mostly ceramic toilets underneath the rim, they're likely to cut their fingers in the process. So you can see we have to be particularly careful. Cells should be inspected every day, not what I call searched, but they should be inspected every day. So what you'll have, they call them FCs now, fabric checks. I remember when I first joined, they were called LBBs, locks, bolts and bars. And you're going to come into the cell to check that the door is still in good condition, the locks are okay, everything's working, the hinges are working. You're going to be checking the walls to make sure they're not Shawshank Redemption with Marilyn Monroe or whoever, Rita Hayworth pinned on it. We give prisoners boards. Normally we used to pin them just at the top so we could lift them up and check the walls behind them. Obviously checking the bars up on the windows to make sure the bars and all the frames are in place and nothing's been loose or broken that's in there. And checking. In prisons, things are not allowed to be fixed to the back walls. That's so that we can check the back wall, because that's the outside wall. Bearing in mind, in cells like this, these walls are thick. So trying to tunnel from one cell to another, you'd have served a sentence before you got to that point in time anyway. So,
Mr. G, sorry, can I just interrupt you? more time, just purely because I know this from being down our sister site. So we've got two prisons. We've got Shrewsbury Prison where we are right now, and we've got Shepton Mallet Prison in Somerset. And in Somerset, in a prison cell there, at the end cell on the floors, so on the top level, there is the prisoners in there. They tunnelled through their cell wall into the room next door, which was the access to the attics. So they tunnelled through that for weeks and weeks and weeks. They broke out some of the stones, climbed through into the next space, which was the roof access, climbed up the ladder, sawed off basically the lock, climbed up into the roof space, climbed all the way across the entire jail on the roof space, up onto the roof, and then got stuck when they realised that the wall the other side was a 70-foot drop, highest walls in the UK for a prison in Shepton Mallet, and they got stuck at that point, and their escape was foiled with them stuck on the roof basically. But there is in our prison in Shepton, there is basically a hole in the wall that you can go and see when we reopen, and it is literally Shawshank Redemption style of how it was done.
Well, that just reiterates the importance of doing daily, good fabric checks to make sure these things, because I don't imagine you dig through a wall in half an hour, do you?
No, I think it took a couple of weeks, but they did hide it well, in fairness. And the trouble with Shepton is Shepton was and people are asking about the different categories of prison, but Shepton was a lifers jail, so predominantly everybody was in there, had already been in prison for a minimum of 7-8 years, and they were there on the process of going towards potentially Cat D or how it would be. And these, I guess, were prisoners that were potentially more trusted. I want to be careful about how I word that, because obviously the officers that worked at Shepton were exceptionally good officers. But unfortunately it does happen, doesn't it? You've only got so many officers, 2 officers per landing to what, 80-odd prisoners?
Well, absolutely. I mean, with the shortage of staff that we've had over the last 10 years, the big reduction in staff through the austerity years, staff have been left with the same amount of work to do, but relatively less staff to have to achieve it in. Unfortunately, with that, corners can be cut when they shouldn't be, because member prisons have to run their regimes. They're going to keep running their regimes as best they can, one way or the other. Now, to say that, there are some prisons, particularly the Cat C prisons that were built in the 1960s and 70s, they'd only have what they call a single brick wall between the cells. So those cells to knock through into others was a relatively easy thing to do. That happened once in a Cat C prison that I used to work in down the segregation unit. Because there were single cells between them, prisoners smashed out through the one into the next cell, and they literally went through 5 cells, and they did it literally within a few hours because they're just single brick walls. Not so much in... beg your pardon. Not so much in Shrewsbury. These are solid brick walls.
It's listed.
There's solid brick roofs and there's solid brick and concrete floors here. So digging out of these old Victorian cells, you're going to have to be you're going to have to be serving a long time to manage it. So,
well, people are talking here about breaking out prison, watching Escape from Alcatraz, watching Prison Break, and funny enough, it was one of the things that we do at Shrewsbury. It'll start at Shepton later in the year, but it does run at Shrewsbury right now. Is we run an event called Prison Break, where it is literally that you come into an event, you're here for 2.5 hours, we put you inside a cell, the door is closed, and you basically have 2.5 hours to figure out how to get out of your prison cell. Once you're out of your cell on the landing, you have to figure out how to get off the landing. Once you're off the landing, you have to figure out how to get yourself around the jail. And at the same time, the prison is open to the public, so you've got members of the public who will be shopping you. They will literally be snitching as you're walking around, and they're telling officers they're in that cell, they're hiding here. And you spend 2.5 hours in this amazing, immersive escape game trying to break out of a real prison. It is the largest escape game in the world. It's one of the only prison break events in a real prison. It is amazing. And those are coming back from July, from once we reopened. So, sorry, Graham, I'm doing a plug, but somebody said, or 2 people actually have asked, why don't they just put CCTV cameras in the prison to make it easier?
CCTV cameras where in the prison? Because it would probably come down to a privacy issue, to be honest with you, because you've got toilets which are relatively open to exposure, and the reality is, I've said they don't put cameras in cells because it would be a privacy issue. Even inside cells, there's some what they call human decency that has to be applied. So yeah, I mean, I imagine if the government decide to change the law and they can get through that, then there'd be nothing stopping them do that if they choose to do so. But remember, all these initiatives that you see in prison don't come from prison. prisons, they come from governments. Governments make the rules that we apply and that we live by. There are modern prisons will have cameras out on the landings. I'm going to be honest with you there. Cameras on landings do not deter people from doing, if they're determined to do what they do next. There have been prisoners that have assaulted each other. They've assaulted members of staff right there on open landings with cameras watching them. So it doesn't deter in that sense. Violence in prison, sadly, has increased dramatically over the last 10 years, particularly the last 10 years when we've lost much of our staffing levels. And that's prisoner on prisoner and prisoners on staff as well. So we are in an unprecedented time at the moment. I believe the figures for staff is that there are over 10,000 assaults on staff every single year. Most of those staff would be prison officers. There are obviously teachers and civilians, and there would be nurses that would also be at risk of being assaulted within prisons, of course. So you can see, and not all of those assaults are serious. Like again, I'd be telling you a lie if I said they were all life-changing. They're not. But a higher and higher element of those assaults are causing staff to not be able to come to work as a prison officer and or a member of staff, and possibly not ever getting the chance to work again out in society. Some of these assaults are extremely, extremely violent, and you can see the environment that we work in. As I said, and prisoners are also, they assault each other as well, of course.
Officer G, I'd love to cover two more points before we bring you out for Q&A, if you're happy. One is about smoking in prison cells. So if you're allowed to smoke in prison cells, what happens if there's a fire? And also, I think it would be really topical and actually on point if you could just cover what the experience you think prisoners and prison officers are going through right now based on COVID-19, because I think a lot of prisons are on a lockdown, aren't they? So can you cover those two bits quickly?
Well, if I cover that point with COVID, I've still got friends, colleagues that are working in the prisons. There is very much what I call a lockdown situation going on there, because in some prisons there just isn't the space to have everybody out, even social distancing. Now, there are some prisons that are extremely large. When you think of places up like HMP Berwyn, which is built for just over 2,000 prisoners, it's probably sitting on, at least 15, 20 acres of ground. Category C prisons might have things like football pitches, rugby pitches, and a lot more outer space. So there may be an occasion where they can get prisoners out on a daily basis, limited numbers, to get out and get some level of fresh air and to access the showers. But this is all going to have to be controlled. You can't just open up a wing and let people just wander in because of the danger. And I know that some prisons are separating some of the landings, so if they get people that have got the virus, they can isolate them down onto a different landing. But it's not easy. It's not an easy situation to have to deal with. So, yeah. But I can't give you an absolutely, this is the routine, because every prison will have something different depending on their size, their style, and their security about how they manage this continual lockdown situation. Being very old, Joel, I forgot the first question you mentioned.
I was going to say, I bet you forgot the first question. It's about smoking and cells.
Oh, yeah.
And also what happens if a cell...
Yeah, but bearing in mind that smoking now is banned in prisons, no prisoners are allowed, there's no tobacco for sale in prisons, so there is no smoking allowed in prisons whatsoever. What they are allowed, and they have been for many years, is to access patches through the healthcare, but I believe they're entitled to buy the electronic cigarettes. So they can buy the electronic cigarettes if they choose to. No, some prisoners might use the opportunity to give up smoking. Others will just take a choice of those other things that are on offer, to be honest with you. I did point out up there, if you take a look up there, if you can see the camera just above the door, you've got the smoke detectors in cells now. Bearing in mind, when you get a cell fire, you can imagine the problem. It may be something to do with the electrics. It might be intentionally set. Prisoners might intentionally set fire to their cells, or it may be an accident. I said they're highly dangerous. They are dangerous situations, but it's getting those prisoners out at the earliest point in time. That's why the hose that you see coming through the door is a huge assistance. You've also got the smoke detectors that pick up any problems at its earliest point. Now, there may be a serious fire somewhere within cells and or on the landings where we may need to evacuate prisoners off the landings to some other secure place within the prison. Remember, it's automatic to bring in fire brigades for these things and deal with it as we do. As I said, different prisons, different sizes, where they'll have different ways of dealing with those issues. Can I sit down now? I'm old and my little legs are tired.
You're going to expect a coffee now or something along those lines, aren't you? Yeah, but do you want to come on out of the cell if you're happy in there, and then you can have a seat by your mic and you can do some Q&A?
I think I've done all the Q&As, haven't I?
Oh no, there's loads. Right, let me. You can put that mic down. That's fine. So if you have any questions, guys, you've not asked so far, do fire them up, and we will wait for him. Are you comfy, sir?
I'm sitting comfy.
Would you like a cushion?
I'd like a cup of coffee, but I'm not supposed I'm going to get one. But
No, you're not going to get a cup of coffee. Not now, anyway. Our restaurant's still closed. Okay, let me find you a second. Where are you? Like I said, it's a highly technical operation. I'm waiting for the BBC, so there we go.
I look so much older on TV. I'm a lot younger than this, guys, really am. It's just a hard life.
You said to me earlier, it was quite amusing because he sat down and he saw himself in the picture you can currently see, and his comments were, I'm orange, I look like Donald Trump.
I was going to make a comment then, but I won't.
No, don't. You're not allowed to swear, remember. Okay, so let's have a quick look. And I've got Harriet behind me who's going to shout questions at me if I've forgotten anything. I'm just trying to have a quick flick through. How do prisoners earn money?
Earning money, we've got, most prisons have some level of employment for prisoners. You're going to have workshops, you're going to have different education. Prisoners do get paid if they go to education. You've got prisoners that work in kitchens, you've got prisoners that work as cleaners on landings and do all kinds of different jobs. In some prisons, I do remember at Shrewsbury, they used to have prisoners that used to come in with trades, and some were painters, and some were decorators, and some were plumbers. And they'd very often be attached to a works officer who would use them, and they would go out and do that work together. They were more trusted prisoners. So yes, they earn money, but they don't actually see money. It's held on an account. They are entitled to spend what they earn in prison on a weekly basis. They're also entitled to spend some more than that because they also have private cash. Prisoners are allowed to have private cash sent into them, so their private cash and their wages are added together. However, there are limits to how much they can spend. Enhanced prisoners are entitled to spend more money on a canteen once a week. Standard prisoners somewhat less, and basic prisoners are sort of restricted to the basic minimum amount that they would be entitled to spend. And that's usually things like buying phone credits. Remember, they don't get phone calls for free in prisons. They have to pay for their phone calls and other bits and pieces. So, yeah, and it's on an account basis that they sign it off. They nearly always order it sort of a bit like online, really. They put their sheets in, let's say on a Saturday, and that may be delivered anywhere from Tuesday up to Friday at that particular prison, where it will be dished out to them, and they'll sign for it and take it away.
Because I do remember when Rolf Harris went to prison, and there was an article, I think it was in the Sun or the Mirror, so a really reputable source, and they were claiming that Rolf Harris had £20,000 put into his prison account, and he was, and that was unfair. But the reality is, they could have put 20,000 or 200,000 into his account. He still would have been limited to that spending limit per week.
I remember once a prisoner leaving here on reception, and they literally counted up just over £4,500 in cash to give to the prisoner.
So would you say crime does pay?
I think not, but there you go.
They've been here for 30
I won't get involved in that debate.
They've been here for 30 years.
I won't get involved.
So now, look, this is a difficult one. I don't know how you're going to answer this one, but I'll throw it out. Someone said, what's the worst crime someone's been imprisoned for besides murder? I don't think there is one, is there? I mean, you've seen...
Well, you've got murder. Everybody in society sees things differently about what they consider to be...
Yeah, I was going to say, we saw the police helicopter going over earlier, didn't we?
Everybody in society has a different view about crimes. Now, obviously, you've got those people like your Ian Brady's. While it's murder, it's also an horrific offence that they committed. When you think about that with children, you've got paedophilia going on. To me, they're all horrific crimes, murder. So people in society might balance that up.
Yeah, it's just been the anniversary of Lee Rigby just a few days ago.
Yeah,
I know
young Lee Rigby was slaughtered on the street by, so everybody comes from a slightly different place, but murder in law, we tend to sit murder at the top of that tree as being the most horrendous of all offences, taking someone's actual life.
Somebody's just said, and Sorry, Graham, I didn't mean to interrupt. This one's a new one on me. They said that their son, who was in prison, was able to buy curtains and a carpet with the money that they earned.
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on the prison, how long you're serving, and the security level of that prison, and the enhanced status of that prisoner, there are prisoners in some prisons that are allowed to buy little curtains to put up on the windows, because there's not normally, stops the security lights shining in, I suppose. They're allowed to buy continental quilts or what do you call them, coverings for their bed. They're even in some prisons are allowed to walk around in tracksuits, and they're not in sort of traditional prison clothes. So every prison is different depending on where you are, how long you're serving, and the security of the prison and the categorization of that prison, I suppose. So it's not a strict rule that everybody walks around in prison clothes.
And you mentioned that earlier, and I was desperate to jump in at the time because I know from seeing being on the tours and seeing all the different questions asked, but there was a time, wasn't there, when prisoners had to go into prison clothes, and therefore the prison clothes would get washed on site on the prison, and they would be reissued to other prisoners. So you could be getting inducted and being given a pair of pants that has been worn by 20, 30 other prisoners previously.
Yeah, I must be honest, when I first came here and when I joined in the 70s, all convicted prisoners were put into prison clothes, and they're relatively strict. They were very one style. The old twill shirts, there may be one or two people out there that might remember twill shirts for prison, blue striped pinstripe shirts they used to wear. If anybody's seen Porridge, when you look at that there, if they were coming down for a meal, they'd be required to wear a tie. They wouldn't be walking around with open neck shirts on. But you take a look at the rest of the prison gear, and it can be quite representative. Clothes are handed over on what they call a rotational basis, so that every time they'll put in their bag anything that they want washed, towels, socks, underpants, bits and pieces, clothes. They will then get handed out. Whatever they hand in, they will get a clean set back. So they're on a rotational basis, and everything's recycled in prisons. Even today, when prisoners are wearing tracksuits and other clothes, it's basically all recycled. So it may have been worn by thousands of other prisoners that have come before them. Let's be honest, in prisons, we recycle stuff to destruction.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm with you. I was just reading some of the other questions. You've had a hello, Graham. You've had a shout out from Kalo Pugh saying that they're watching. Hello, Uncle Graham.
Oh dear.
And Mum says hello too.
Hello.
I'm just flicking through. There are some questions, guys, that we answered last week, and you can go back and look at those. Somebody's just asked about whether anybody escaped. We covered that quite comprehensively last week. If you jump back onto our YouTube channel, Shrewsbury Prison, look at last week's live, and you'll see on the Q&A there that Graham did cover about a prisoner escaping, so we're not going to cover that one again. Somebody asked earlier, I remember this one coming in, why do they call them screws?
Screws. Right. If you go back in time, right back to probably the 17th and the early 18th century, it was not uncommon for people in prisons to go onto things like treadmills, or to go on what they call the cranking system, which was basically like when you go to a gym today, you see those exercise bikes, and that's what they'd be doing. It may be part of a punishment, it may be part of their sentence. And they were all sort of in a line doing that with big boards between them, so they couldn't talk to each other. They were expected to do so many rotations per hour. It was meant to be mind-numbingly boring. Any problems, the turnkeys, as they would have been called in those days, could go to the end and tighten a big screw up at the end to make it harder for them to do. So basically it was, if you're going to muck me about, I'm going to make it harder work for you to do. And that's where the terminology screws come from. Because
they literally turned a screw.
Turning the screw, yeah. I'm not sure where the terminology boss came from. Somebody said it was something that came out of the Americas in the Deep South, when BOS, as it used to be, boss, used to stand for bag of shit.
Language.
But I had to say that.
Sorry, ladies and gents,
I'm paraphrasing now, guys.
I haven't got a beep button. We discussed this beforehand. I said I need a beep button because I knew at some point he would slip. So
no faking it on this program.
Apologies, but he's very good on tours. They cater very well for their audiences. But funny enough, treadmills, because at our sister prison in Shepton, there is a treadmill building where you can see where the old treadmills used to be, and actually, funny enough, that one's slightly different because it used to have a mill the other side, so they used to actually use the treadmills to grind the corn, which is why it's called Corn Hill, because it is Corn Hill. So anyway, if you're visiting Shepton, the guys down there will obviously go through that with you, and the tours do. Let's have a quick look at the next questions coming in. If a prisoner buys something for their cell, so obviously they rent TVs, but if they buy things, are they allowed to take it with them when they leave?
Anything that the prisoner purchases that they've done so and it's theirs, yeah, they can take everything with them. So if they bought food and bits and pieces, because they're allowed to buy things like tins of tuna, tins of fruit, other crisps and pop and stuff like that, tea bags, coffee, it's theirs. They're perfectly entitled to take it with them.
Yeah.
What they're not entitled to do is take somebody else's and try to get that out of the prison.
That's fine. This is a great question, and I know again that you and I discussed this probably a couple of years ago now. What happens if you're a prison officer and a member of your family gets convicted and comes to the prison that you're an officer in?
Whew. It has happened. A few times I'm aware of it's happened in prisons. The reality with that is if there's a member of your family or somebody that's very close to you or sometimes somebody that's a very close friend of you ends up coming to the prison that you're in, there is a requirement that you would inform the governor of such. And then the governor will make a decision as to whether he thinks it's appropriate for the prisoner and the officer to be in the same establishment. That's a decision that governors would make about whether... I do remember at this prison many, many years ago when I first come here, there was an officer here whose son was in prison on the same wing. However, they weren't particularly on speaking terms at the time, so they were estranged, and it was never an issue. And the officer said, it's not an issue for me, he's a prisoner, Governor, and he would be treated as such. And that's just the way it was. But yeah, there is a requirement that if you've got a member of your family, somebody that you know very well, somebody that you may have a closeness to, there is a requirement that you inform, because you can imagine the possibilities of that person maybe trying to influence and possibly corrupting the officer, basically.
And your daughter's just jumped on to say, luckily she was a well-behaved child. So
well, that's open for debate there, my dear.
But I do know, and again, I know this from Shepton because I know Shepton very, very well. My wife used to work there as a psychologist doing behavioural change programs, and I know there was a prisoner who got transferred into Shepton, and he got transferred out the next day because one of the psychologists knew him. She grew up with him, so she had to say, no, I grew up with him. But because of the type of programs they ran, she just wasn't able, they weren't able to be in that, so they had to ship him out. I think he went to Usk. So they had to go to another prison. So it does happen, obviously.
Oh, absolutely.
They send,
I mean,
send prisoners back out. They're not going to move the staff, let's put it that way.
The reality with that is it'll be the prisoner that's moving. Yeah.
Right, I'm just flicking through. Years ago, officers were also called turnkeys. I think that's probably fairly self-explanatory, that one, isn't it? Yeah. Turnkeys. So I'm just flicking through. Oh, do prisoners have a top dog amongst prisons?
Oh, I've no doubt they do. All prisons have their own hierarchy in prisons, just like if you think about friendship groups that you may all be in, there's always somebody perhaps in that group that's slightly more dominant in the group than the others, slightly more outspoken and slightly more in control of the actions of those people around them. And that's no different in prisons. They will form. There are going to be those that are going to be looking to create that world around them so they can be the top dog and get people to run around at their beck and call, the gangs and the drug dealers and all those kind of people. Yeah, there's going to be a hierarchy in prison. We know of some of them, and sometimes we can manage that, and there's sometimes it's very difficult for us to know it, see it, and manage it. We do the best we can with the resources that we've got. But there will be some kind of top dog. Not quite the same as you see when Sylvester Stallone goes to prison and they're all running around scuttling underneath in the caverns below, and 70% of the prison officers are all involved in the violence and it's not like that. But yeah, there is a system that would run in prisons. Yeah,
I can remember seeing the productions that film here as well, and watching yourself and Keith and Mick, our other officers, watching productions and suddenly seeing an alarm bell go off and 30 officers running in, and you guys are stood there going, there wouldn't even be 30 officers in the jail. Where have all these officers come from?
I do remember once they were doing a scene out on the exercise yard, and they had about 40 prisoners, extras I should say, walking round, and there was something like about 12 or 13 staff on the exercise yard. And I happened to chuckle accidentally, and the director looked at me, and she said, okay, what's so funny then? And I said, on a yard of this size, there could be up to 100 prisoners. There will only be 2 officers out here supervising those 100 prisoners on the exercise yard. That would be it. Yes, there's cameras, but there would only be 2 staff.
And you were responsible for 6 actors getting fired that day.
I must be honest, she did say, cut, can 12 of you leave and just leave 2 of you on the exercise yard, please? I think we ended up with 3. But
yeah, you were popular in the green room.
Yeah, well. I tell them the way it is, they do what they choose.
There's a good one here, and this is going to give you, you're going to answer this in 2 bits, I can tell. Because somebody said, were you ever scared as a prison guard for your safety?
Yeah.
So I know there's obviously the scared question, and there'll be the prison guard bit you're probably going to pick up.
I'm going to correct you at a personal level. We always refer to ourselves as prison officers. Many people, and you'll see it a lot in the newspaper, they talk about warders. We've stopped being warders. I think up in the late 1920s, they changed the whole system, and the official title is actually prison officers. So it's a bit like calling a journalist a hack.
But a guard's an Americanism, isn't it?
They're guards. Well, they're correctional
words.
officers in America.
Yeah.
You've got two kinds of officers that work in America, particularly in maximum security. You have those that are prison guards. They're the ones that man the towers, and they're the armed guards on the outer perimeters. And you've also got correctional officers, who would be, by our terms, prison officers that work inside the establishment with face-to-face contact with prisoners. So there was prison officer. Was I scared?
Have you ever been scared? I know, again, I asked you this question the other day. Have you going to work?
I can't say that I actually come in feeling scared in that sense. Yeah, I've come into prisons and I've been apprehensive. Things have been going on in a prison, and we're stepping through the doors knowing that the potential for these things to go wrong, and you can feel it in the air. The atmosphere is not quite right. And the reality is you are apprehensive, possibly a little bit anxious, and you're going to be a lot more heightened about your senses. You must remember, the longer you work in a prison service, the more you get that sixth sense for something that's not quite right. Things don't feel right. Things are not quite that you expect them to be. I've attended one or two riots in my time. Yes, I've never actually, and I don't know of anybody that's sort of been scared to go in there, but you're apprehensive. Of course you are. Nobody wants to go into any situation and get seriously hurt. You're in the moment. Once you start off in those environments, you're just in the moment then. And you deal with it as it were. So yeah.
So
I think if you're going to be scared at coming into jails, then you're in the wrong job.
Yeah,
you really are.
Someone's just asked the question: what are the rules on becoming friends with a prisoner, either during their time and after their time?
Right. In prisons, generally. It's one of those strange things. When I first joined the job, the advice I would have been given is, listen, you don't want to be going around talking to prisoners. They're not your friends. You tell them what you need to tell them, and you'll listen to anything they've got to say and give them the answer. That's all the contact you need. And as time goes on and your confidence grows within the prison service, you'll learn to start to discriminate, not against the prisoner, but discriminate about those that you can have conversations with and those that you can't talk to. So it's about a confidence thing. And I've known many prisoners in my time that I've had, and I'd say, good relationships with in prison. We've got on well, there's no problems with them, and there are those that I can't get on with. And that's just human nature at the end of the day. There are some prisoners, when I see them outside, remember I live in a small town.
What happens when you see outside? Language?
No, some prisoners, I see them in town, and I've gone down the streets, and I've seen these guys walking around, and they go, hey, Mr. G, are you getting on, boss? And we stopped and had a chat. I'll be honest with you, most of them are people that are ex-prisoners. In other words, they're probably a good 10 years since they've done their last prison sentence. Two lads walked outside the gates when we were open once, and they come past. They recognised me when I was stood in the gate lodge. They got a couple of cans of beer in their hand, walking down towards the river. Hey up, Mr. G, how are you getting on, boss? I said, good, mate, how are you getting on? He said, I'm doing well, boss. He said, I've not been to prison, he said, for 5 years. He said, except for last month. But he said that was only for fines. Now, prisoners sometimes will look at some sort of system and go, well, that to him was sort of doing a fine was at the lower level of the things that he was the kind of prison that was committing. So, but I only come in and did a week for paying for fines, boss. So that doesn't count.
It's a crazy world, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've had many prisoners come in, and they've actually attached themselves, come on the tours, and they've come round. And usually after the event, we don't identify anybody within the group, of course. They'll come up and identify themselves to me. I never approach them. They'll probably say, do you remember me, boss? I was only here once, that was enough for me. Or I've been a few times, or you know what they say, you always remember the ones that are going to give you the most grief.
Yeah, we've had a lot of ex-prisoners when we come back on tours. I can remember even our very first tour, we had a very well-known, very notorious prisoner come back with his family.
And there's one or two that come back and help us out with our prison escape days and get involved, and that's great. I think it's great.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen loads obviously coming back, and most, in fairness, I think nearly all of them come back with parents or children or wives or girlfriends and friends, and they're showing them this is the reality.
Yeah.
And we've had some really emotional moments here as well. I know that it was shortly after we first opened, and we were going through and doing the regular cleaning on the cells, and one of our ex-officers, Steve, walked into a cell and he found a card and a flower, and a parent had brought it in and put it in to a cell where their child had actually killed themselves.
Yes.
And we took it back out because we knew otherwise it would go missing, and we've kept it and it's safe and secure. But we've had those really kind of, I guess, quite close sort of touching moments with family members and with ex-prisoners, haven't we? So let me lighten it back up for you ever so slightly. Somebody asked about how do you decide what you're going to watch on TV? One TV, two prisoners. Want to watch two different channels? Coronation Street or EastEnders?
Well, one hopes that the relationship between the two is pretty good, and they can do that self-negotiation, which they'll be required to do.
And what if it's
now,
not?
I won't tell a lie. There may be people in cells that decide what's going to be on TV, and the other prisoner may be a quiet kind of prisoner that will just tick along with that, either read a book or watch what's on TV. Somewhere they have to come to a compromise or not. Now, you have to remember, out in society today, particularly, there's a huge diversity, and that diversity is coming into prison. So even at reception level, when they first come to jail, we're going to see if we can't look at how we place prisoners in cells together, because most Victorian prisons and many others are going to be putting two prisoners in a cell. So in reception, we do a thing called the cell sharing risk assessment about how we place prisoners together, because it may be to do with religious identification, it may be to do with homophobia, it may be to do with all kind of gang-related stuff, any reason why perhaps two prisoners together may not be a good mix. It's not easy for us to do, because prisons don't have the luxury of loads of empty cells just to keep moving prisoners around. There are some prisons, of course, in the country that are only built as single cell accommodation, where there's only one prisoner in the cell, so it does negate that problem.
Yeah, sorry, I was just reading the question. No, it makes perfect sense. And I think this is a great one. It's probably another a common misconception that we see. What time do the lights go out?
When I first joined the service, if I remember rightly, when I worked in the Borstal system, the old young offender style thing, I think lights were knocked off at 10 o'clock at night. It was compulsory. May have probably been very similar within the prison system. The reality is that, and ever since when I came, it wasn't long after that, there's no particular restriction on lights out in prisons. Prisoners can have their lights on, they can have their TVs on all throughout the night.
Because a prison never sleeps.
Sorry?
A prison never sleeps.
A prison never sleeps, so they can have their TVs on during the night. Some have got their music, some have got their lights on. There's no restriction on prisoners having their lights on 24 hours a day if necessary. We'd like to think that they'd turn them off at some stage.
And that's where you saw earlier, guys, Graham pointed out the black fuse boxes above each cell. Everything's got an independent fuse inside. So there's a fuse for the lights, and there's a fuse for the power. And I believe, and obviously Graham will be able to tell it better than I did because I never did it, but if prisoners had their TVs on really loud at night time, or their music blaring late at night, early hours of the morning, and they were keeping other prisoners awake and they refused to turn off, you could just cut the fuse.
Well, I can't confess to that because that's only for an electrician to do.
Oh, okay. so I'll let you have that one as part of the secrets behind the scenes. Okay, let's have a quick flick through. Radios. Ricky Tomlinson was there. Ricky Tomlinson was here. He also came back. We spent some time with Ricky Tomlinson here.
Right, yes, yeah.
He came back a couple of years ago to do a documentary on Channel 4 about his previous life, and he came back and we had him wandering around the jail, didn't we, looking for his old cell and sat in his old cell.
If I remember right, I was speaking to him and he said that he couldn't remember quite where he was. He thought he was on the 2s. I think it was cell 30 or 31, because he said, I remember seeing the exercise yard. And in those days, in the early 70s, there was a big circular exercise yard outside the cell that he would have been in. That's gone and long gone and been extended into other buildings. So I think he sort of, and it was a long time ago, so he sort of misplaced himself in time, yeah.
There's obviously a few prison officers on here because someone just turned in and said, I've turned the electric off to cells before when they're being too noisy.
Don't confess.
There might be an electrician.
I did not witness the incident, sir.
Do prisoners get a wake-up call?
No, they don't.
And a
The
newspaper
reality
and a
is,
cup of coffee?
when we come out, the very first thing that we do, very early in the morning, the night shift will do their final check by counting prisoners in their cells, and then within about the hour, the day staff come on, they will do a check, just walking round the doors on the landings, flipping back the spy holes or the flaps, putting a light on if it's winter to have a look. That kind of noise starts to generate, and prisoners generally are awake. Very rarely have I opened doors on prisoners at 7:30, 7:45, where they haven't already been awake, or at least disturbed to be awake. Yeah, very rarely. There might be the odd occasion, very rare occasion, but no.
Okay, has Ross Kemp been here? Ross Kemp hasn't visited us yet, has he? We've not had Ross Kemp come in for anything TV-wise yet.
What, to act or as a prisoner?
Well, either.
I'm not aware.
I was going to say, I don't think we've had him yet.
I don't know if he's got a dark secret. I can't remember. But
probably has, as a Mitchell or other. Okay, ladies and gents, I think we're there. Unless is there anything you'd like to add, Officer Goodwin? We've gone 10 minutes over our time, so I'm very conscious that you're on overtime now, and that's very expensive for us.
It is. Nothing. I look forward to seeing you next week, guys, when I'll talk a little bit about segregation, the isolation of prisoners, and what we call commonly the strip cell or the isolation cell, and the reasons why they have them in all prisons.
You're stealing my thunder now. I'm just going to come back to my camera, and you've just completely stolen my thunder. Hold on.
I'll come and sit there as well if you like. It's not a
problem. No. It's I'm even going to turn your mic down.
I can see you now.
Ladies and gents, thank you very much. And it seems to have worked a little bit smoother this week than it did last week. Next week we are, as Graham just said, as Officer Goodwin just said, next week we're going to go downstairs. So we're going to go onto the ones. We'll be able to cover segregation from there, which will include the strip cell, which is a really interesting cell to look at. We'll be able to cover constant watch. We'll look at MDT, which is mandatory drug testing. And also we're going to get into the showers, because it's a common area that people talk about is the showers, and obviously it's where the old slopping out used to happen. So we're going to do that again next Wednesday, same time, 11 o'clock. The event is already tagged, so it's pinned at the top, so you can just click on it, join the event. Obviously, share it as much as you like. Prepare yourselves with questions and stuff like that, and we'll do the same format. This Saturday evening, we're live on the Shrewsbury Prison page. That'll be myself, Lauren, our site manager, and Stacey, who's one of our CSAs and tour guides. And we go around the prison basically at night time. We're going to do this area, so we're going to look at the twos. We're going to look at some different cells on A-wing, and basically wander around looking at it at night time. It's a very different journey at night. So that's a really good event to jump onto as well if you want. And again, you can find that on the events. Have I missed anything, Harriet? Is there anything else I need to say?
No,
we're reopening soon. Can I talk about reopening? Do you know what? I'll just do it. I'll get in trouble afterwards. But we are planning our reopening. We will be releasing some more details and videos about it. It is going to be June. It looks like the middle of June. We are, I would say, fortunate. This is something that is very plays to our favour. We are the most purpose-built social distancing building in the country. You could not design and build a more purpose-built social distancing building than a prison. They were literally built to social distance people from society and to social distance people from each other. So in that sense, we're very fortunate. You can see the amount of space we have. We can run one-way systems. If anything, we're just going to run it more like a jail. So when you come in, it will run more like a prison. Graham is smiling over there with 2 thumbs up. We're going to run it more like a prison. So it'll be one set of stairs you can come up, one set of stairs you can come down, so on and so forth. Lots of hand washing points and stuff like that. So we are going to look at opening middle of June. That will be self-guided tours we'll get open for. We won't start our guided tours probably till middle of July, but we will be starting things like ghost tours, lights out tours, and hopefully the prison break events early July. So that's all going to start, and again opening our restaurant as well. We've got lots of outside space. We've got 4 acres, so we are coming back. I think that's it, probably, isn't it? And
I think we've covered everything.
I'm going to get in so much trouble after this for giving that away. But thank you very much for those of you that joined us. We'll be back next Wednesday, and I do know that when we reopen, we are going to continue to do these on a Wednesday morning, but you will also be able to come and watch them live if you want to. You'll be able to turn up on a Wednesday morning, you'll be able to come into the jail, and you'll be able to go in and actually sit in a large space and watch Officer Goodwin deliver different aspects, and you'll be able to ask him questions live. So literally stood in front of him, which he's going to really enjoy. Oh, you want extra money for that? Okay, he wants a pay rise. Ladies and gents, thank you very much. That is it. I'm gonna let you get on at this point. I need to figure out which camera I'm going to, and we will obviously see you next week. I've got the camera over there today, so I need to go switch off from over there. Thank you, ladies and gents.